initiation phase essentially is part of planning as well. So almost half of what you're doing there is actually about making sure we're going on the right trail.
Correct.
Rather than just we're going on any trail and let's see where
Yeah,
it takes us.
correct. And that's what Agile is. But when you do that with Agile, you have to be really experienced. You have to be really prepared, and you really have to know what you're doing.
I came across the CAMP approach, the CAMP methodology, which is contained agile methodology
Correct.
process. Found it fascinating because it talks about going on a camp, and that aligns with Trailblazers and Salesforce. Can you talk a little bit about how did it come about and how does it get used?
So it really came about when I was working, and I work for consulting company, and we do deliver on projects. So as we were going through and delivering with clients, we kept running into issues where, we really needed to contain scope, and we really needed to ensure that we were successful because we had set budgets. We had set we started with set scope. We set off with an itinerary, and then we get in there and we get out on the trail, and then we're all over the place. and so really this methodology kind of came about with along those lines of really kind of containing and building that culture of containment right from the beginning. And then I just kind of took all of those learnings and put it into an agile framework and this methodology, which I call kind of contained agile. And being in the Salesforce ecosystem, we nicknamed it CAMP and added the methodology process to it and kind of built off of that. So
this is a great methodology. It's very visual. I can picture myself going on a camp, and there's not enough room in my backpack, so that's about scope containment. But how does this fit versus a more traditional, the sort of software development lifecycle methodology for delivering projects?
So it really kind of is based off of what we get out of Project Management Institute, or PMI. What we see there with their 4 core quadrants of initiating, planning, executing, and then the closing phase. So really, if you have a project, it's built on that foundation, and really ensuring that we do go through a series of that initiating discovery. But most of the time, our projects, we have a tendency to go right from discovery into build, and we skip over the planning phase, which is one of the hardest phases to do. But if we do it right and we take the time to make those hard decisions, then we go into executing, and it becomes much easier. It helps us to stay on track, stay on trail, stay on task, and then finish out our project, and then we go again. So our whole idea, and that's why we have it in a circle, because it's really about going through each of the phases. And then when we say, hey, it's not in this project, but it'll be in the next one, because they see the circle, they go, okay, it's not linear, it's circular. And that's what our projects really should be about. And going back in and then planning again, what are we going to do on this trip? Well, where do we want to go?
Okay, so there are a couple of interesting things that come out there. One, I love the fact that planning is a quarter rather than, if I think about SLDC, the software development lifecycle, planning's that little bit, and then there's all of this big piece which is about build and test and deliver. Where actually, as you said, if you get the planning right, and you're obviously, I'm all about make sure you build the right thing before you start building it right. That planning phase is so important. So it's lovely to see a methodology where that's called out, because actually the initiation phase essentially is part of planning as well. So almost half of what you're doing there is actually about making sure we're going on the right trail. Correct. Rather than just we're going on any trail and let's see where it takes us.
Correct. And that's what Agile is. But when you do that with Agile, you have to be really experienced. You have to be really prepared, and you really have to know what you're doing. You are one of those, extreme campers, and that's what we miss a lot of times is we want that, but we don't really have the budgets for it. We don't really have the time for it. And so we have to make those hard choices. We have to say, hey, this is important. This is really what we want to do. and this is how we're going to get it done. And then we'll do it next
I
time,
mean,
you know?
and if I mean, my life as an Accenture consultant, I used to get called into big, like huge programs which were off
Yeah.
the rails. I mean, the biggest one I probably ran was 500 people on
Yes.
the team, but there are probably 100 things going wrong on the project, and you need to find the three things that are going wrong, and
Yeah.
often scope is one
Yes.
of those. Scope, delivery
Yeah.
date, and then team mix. And if you those are probably the three, and scope always comes up again and
Yeah.
again and again. So I love the way that this is all around not saying no, but saying no, not no never, but no now for this phase, and actually helping prioritize the requirements that are going to
Yes.
go in.
Perfect.
So, what size project is this relevant to? Is it only like a small non-profit using it, or is it all the way up to large scale
Yeah,
transformations?
generally it tends to fit best if it's a up to a year long project with a set budget and a set scope, and and basically that if you're going on the bigger, the really big transformational, that's really where possibly scale agile works better. It's organizational wide, so if this isn't an organizational wide, maybe it's in a specific business unit, but still can be quite large, can still be a large team, but not quite to the level of over what I like to say over a year. And that's really where we found where we had the gap is we had agile and scrum and kind of the agile hybrid approach, but then we had scaled, but we didn't really have this in between kind of larger project but not too large project, and yet again that set scope, set budget, and we have to make tough choices.
But how those criteria sound like even if you've got a relatively small project, you've got think about one migrating from profiles and permission sets to a new
Yeah.
security model. Would
I
that
mean,
fit?
it could very much so, because again, you could go down many different trails, different paths with doing that. And so to be able to say, okay, what's most important, and maybe during discovery you allow for that divergent thought process, that ability to diverge and say, okay, where do we all want to go? What could we all do? But then to say, well, maybe we just want to start here and we want to see if this is going to work and how this is going to work. That's again, contained agile can work really well there, because then we set the scope, we set the budget, we set the time frame, and then we get going, and we do that, and then we come around and say, okay, is that working? That really kind of MVP feedback loop that we also get built in here to say, how much of that do we want, how much time do we want to go, and then see how that's working, and then we move on and add the next piece. And so I mean, we use it for vacation planning, so I mean, so
Well, I think once you know about how you plan a project, everything looks like a project.
correct. Everything looks like correct. I mean, literally everything can look like a project, and so
So if I take you back, you said it's about set scope, set
yeah,
budget. So at what point you've got the initiation phase, you've got planning, executing,
yeah.
closing. Are you is the budget set and the scope set before you even initiate, or is that discovered during the one of those phases?
Usually it's set in the initiating somewhere in after within discovery. At the very beginning you should kind of come in with a general budget, so that's at the very
Yeah.
beginning initiating phase. But then you go into discovery, you refine it some more, maybe make some decisions to say, hey, we do want to add this piece, this we found that this is super critical, so maybe the budget gets expanded there, or it might be reduced, and maybe we can be more efficient, maybe we don't need to do this right now, let's focus in on this. And so that budget could vary once we get through discovery, but our goal is to kind of stick to that and stick to now to that timeline once we get out of the planning phase. So then once we get into planning, that's where we'll refine the budget even further, because sometimes we come out of discovery and go into that planning, and that's where we really have to make choices. We have to take a look at what's most important, how does it fit in. we talk about the mental preparedness of the team. So is your team mentally prepared to go into this next year long project? And many times I've talked to managers and been like, what are you doing to take that burden off of your team now that we see the workload or what we want to do? What are you doing to offset that? Are you bringing in extra resources? Are you adding? What are you doing to take off their plate? Because most of the time, a lot of time we see that projects get added to a company, get added to an individual. Hey, you're on this project, great, but you still have to do all your other work. And so really looking at that mental part of that, and or can we use tools now like GPT and other things to like reduce our how much work is going into planning or to make it more efficient. And so that's other things that we're looking at right now as we look at that to say how can we make this project be successful.
So I think you said at the beginning, this feels a lot more around, it's almost a project management methodology, the way to deliver a project. When you're in the execution phase, then you're into the detail of how do I deliver software. But actually, this is about making this fits on top of any other development methodology, because this is actually how you manage stakeholders, manage scope, and then start to plan your way around it. So you've got initiating, planning, executing. What happens? I get those, but what happens in the closing phase? Because that feels like it's slightly new.
Yeah, it actually, again, with PMI and other projects, we should be doing this. We should be closing out Lean Six Sigma. So I'm also a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt. And so we do that in our controlling phase of Lean Six Sigma, DMAIC process.
Yeah.
And that control phase, that's really what that closing is about, is putting in a little bit more controls, but then also celebrating your wins, getting adoption. A lot of times people spend a lot of time and money and then they don't share your journey, share, how many times have you gone on a vacation and you're showing everybody your pictures, and yet we don't do that with projects. And so this is a time to kind of sit back, share what you've done, share your learnings, what was successful, what wasn't. If you're really in a creative environment, you should hope to fail sometimes. Creativity breeds failure, but then it also breeds great success. So maybe the project wasn't 100% like perfection, but you learned a lot from it. You understood the business. People were able to move forward. So let's learn those lessons. Let's celebrate what we learned. It doesn't have to be perfect. Creativity is messy. It's it builds into this also that sense of celebration, of fun. I like to have fun in my projects, and so we like to bring a lot of that to play. And that's what that helps to do instead of just rushing into the next project.
Okay, I've not heard that in very many projects, and it's fantastic. And it's also about, as you said, working out, we call it WWW, what went well, and then EBI, even better if.
Oh, that's
so
great.
There's then, okay, if we're going to go around that cycle, what things would we change so we can do a better job next time we go around that cycle?
Correct. And I mean, you think about vacations you've taken that have gone really well, and some vacations that maybe not gone as well as you had hoped. And what was usually what happened is we got out of containment, we went on a different path, we did something we didn't have planned, and it, didn't maybe go as well as we had hoped. And, just those little things that what we can learn from and get better. Because again, we're always learning, right? Always adapting. And so that's what we're.
Yes, I think someone said there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. So it's, yeah. And again, I think the other point you made, which is if you're really creative, there are bound to be things which don't necessarily work out.
Correct. And that's okay too, because we can learn from that and we can move from that. But if you don't even have that path set up in front of you and you're just what I call all out in the wilderness, and you're like, we got one team over there and another team over here, and like nobody's within camp, everybody's lost, and it's hard to, nobody can get back to that center, get back to that, what we call touch tree, get back to that, core grounding, that where we need to be in, and that we want to have a successful project. And time again, I think we forget about that, and that we're all here together to be successful. And so that's what we strive for.
So if you're on this journey, you're delivering a particular phase of work, and I mean, 2023 was the year of, wow, I thought we knew what we're doing and things have changed. How do you feed that in, where you think you're on a path and suddenly there's a major requirement that's come in from left field? How does the methodology?
So we have two things. We have one, we prepare, we're ready for any weather. So we're prepared for any weather. So that's one of our statements, where we come in and we say, we no matter what, things are going to happen. People are going to leave your project. Things will come up, accidents, COVID happened, and we had to adapt. And so we're always prepared for any weather. And that means too that we have backups. So we never have anybody, one single point in our project, who is doing it all or knows it all. That, we have somebody who is either, even if they're not on the project, they're maybe following along on the project. So if something happened to me and I had to step out, that person could step in and not be completely lost, not know, this is what we've done. That's why documentation, having the good planning, having a good project plan, and having good user stories, all of the pieces that we're building, that we have good documentation around it, that we can utilize if somebody has to come in and somebody has to step away. And yeah. And then we also practice situational awareness. And so that is, we communicate. So we always know where we are in the project. Again, if you ever do backcountry camping, or you're going out on a trail, you really have to know what may be going out, practice that situational awareness, knowing what is going, hey, there's a storm coming on the horizon. We need to turn around now. And so knowing where you are is critical to being also successful. So we build in some fun things like that too. So.
Okay, that's fantastic. So that's about worrying about things that change maybe in terms of the resourcing. But what about change of scope? So we thought we knew what we're doing, and suddenly we've realized either there's a new bit of functionality we need to put in, and it has to be somehow shoehorned into the piece of work we're currently doing.
So that's a choice, right? So I'd like to talk about, so we're out there, we brought everything to go rock climbing. And we have all the right tools for that. And suddenly the market changed, COVID happened, something, and now we really need to go canoeing. And that's where a lot of times I have stopped the project and reset, maybe because sure, I could be out there, I could cut down, I could figure out how to make a canoe. We can make a canoe while we're out here, but I don't have the right tools for it. I don't have the right resources. I don't have the right. So instead, sometimes we do have to stop, go back in and kind of reset. And maybe we don't have to do a full discovery. We don't have to do all of the pieces, but we might have to. We might really say, you know what? We could try to shoehorn that in, but this isn't the right way to do it. The right way is to say, no, we need to go back into town, get all the right supplies, and then come back out, set up camp, plan, do all of that, and then finish the project. And that is, may cost you money, but it'll cost you less than us trying to build that canoe when we don't have the right resources.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I mean, I think the more I listen to this, and I'm thinking about many of the admins, the business analysts who are out there, and they're lacking some sort of project management framework, which doesn't feel hugely complicated with Gantt charts. This feels a lot more more relatable. And that idea of, okay, the scope has changed, having a mechanism to go, we need to go back and actually reevaluate it, rather than, I'll try and do that as well, which is never going to go.
It's never. You've seen it too many times, right? It just doesn't work. And so having, again, the framework to say, wait a minute, or to make the tough choice, because markets change, COVID happened, other things happen. And I mean, we're looking at the whole AI stuff coming in. Chat, GPT comes into play. Now, what are we going to do with this? How can we use, generative, pre-transformers? How are we going to do all of this stuff? How can we utilize this in our business? And that might require us to maybe stop this project and go back and rethink about it. And that's what I find interesting now, even with discovery, thinking about building and doing discovery in a way that we're building our prompts. So if we were to do our discovery now, where we're gathering data so that we can feed it into the prompt, into planning, and it can then build our user stories, maybe some LWCs, maybe the first round. Like, it's never 100% there, but it gets us 80% of the way. And so now our BAs and our leads and our architects are thinking about gathering data from a prompt-driven thought process.
I think the what we're discovering with GPT is that because it's very good at taking data, whether it's textual data or numbers data, and applying it does it very quickly, but it does it very literally. And actually what we're discovering is it's exposing someone who hasn't done a very good discovery piece of work, or they haven't, and therefore the prompts aren't very good. And I've been looking and going, well, that's not a very good response. That's not very good output. And you go, well, okay, look back on yourself, look back and go, maybe it was because you didn't actually give it a very good input. And I think it's putting the emphasis back on better discovery, better planning, better documentation. And those people who harness that, get that right, they're the people who are actually going to gain from GPT. A loose prompt, as in a loose set of planning, we're not quite sure where we're going, we're not quite sure the scope of this, you're going to get pretty poor results. Those people who really double down and go, let's get the basics right, and let's really focus on getting really good discovery, really crisp analysis. AI can do an amazing job. GPT can do an amazing job of drawing process maps, writing user stories, working out what solutions are.
Right. Yeah. But we think of how much time we spend in discovery. If you spend the time there, spend the time in the planning, and then it'll really set you up for success. And to be able to then build to, really what's important, and really, again, move your company a little bit further. And then we go again. And because, again, we don't want to build these huge solutions and we realize we're only using a tiny bit of them, build the most important thing, and then go back again and see what's more important again. So.
Yeah. I mean, people say, we've got an adoption problem, we need to do better training. No, quite often you actually need to go make sure you built the right thing. The reason you've got an adoption problem is not because people don't want to use it because they're not well trained. They're not using it because it isn't actually what they need. Right. So that again goes back to the planning piece.
And making them.
So this is fantastic. So I'm really excited about what this offers. So for the people listening, how would they find out more about this?
So I am working with Focus on Force, and we've developed with that team a certification. It's called the Essentialist Certification in CAMP, and this is the first beginning of this. CAMP is 20 years old in my stuff, but really the last 2 solid years of building this curriculum and building this foundation that then we can build upon. And so if you really want to learn more, we have the certification along with, again, all of the training that I have built around this. This was just a little piece of, many hours worth of training, documentation, learning. I also have templates that you can utilize. So best templates that we have, I have developed over the years that I've used to help teams be successful. And again, a little bit of fun along the way. I teach you some fun, creative session and how to get those juices going. So that's all part of the Essentialist training that we have and certification.
So this sounds like it's something that pretty much anybody involved in a project should at least understand. Maybe you're not driving it, maybe you're actually just one of the people who's on the journey, but you certainly need to know where it's
Yes.
going.
Perfect. And how no matter what your role is on a project, how best to talk to, the client and build that culture of togetherness, of having a successful, and then really being prepared for anything that might come along the way.
I love how approachable this is, and how you can relate to all the phases, and it brings it to life. So thank you
Thank
so much.
you. It was great being here.